YouTube! I'm back with another versus video, and today we're taking a look at the iPhone 14 Pro Max versus the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Now you might be thinking like, hey, there's a million of these already on YouTube of the YouTubers who rush just to be first. Like, hear me out here. If I'm gonna compare a phone that I actually use for 1 year versus a phone that I just got, shouldn't I give this phone at least 3 to 4 weeks of use before I compare it to the one that I've used for a year? Doesn't make sense to me. So in me looking out for you, the consumer, I decided to use this device for at least 3 to 4 weeks before even uttering a peep of a versus between these two, because what matters most? User experience. So how could you possibly know without being a user and having an experience? Riddle me that. That's why we keep it brutally honest over here. And let's speak about these two in comparison, because there's a lot of narratives. Oh, it's the same phone. Ha ha ha. Not quite true. This is why most people be like, oh, it's not much of a difference, because they look very much the same. But there's always the truth of differences, and those are the things that we're gonna focus on mainly in today's review, as well as user experience, because that's what matters most. Boom. We have the notch versus dynamic island. The pill shape versus this more obstructive notch. The notch has been around for a while, and I'm glad to see it change, as I have upgraded to every iPhone year over year since the notch has been introduced. Breath of fresh air. And obviously, it's all preference. It's like, you know, to some people, oh, it's not enough of a change, and to some people, it's the change that they so wanted. And let's break down how it affects like the viewer experience. Like if I can open up a video, now the notch versus the dynamic island is gonna affect your content differently depending on how your content is set up. Now, as you can see, the dynamic island is protruding into the content before the notch, because the notch is higher up on the upper of the smartphone. But if we go full screen and we come back to that view, at this point, like once it goes back to like full display, I feel like the notch is more obstructive than the pill shape, as you can see. Me personally, I would take this dynamic island pill shape over the notch as far as full screen video goes. Like that's just how I see it, me personally. So we got always on display versus just a lock screen. Look the same, perform the same, but the difference is this one is always on. And as you can see, mine has the black background, because when you do black, you turn off pixels. And I want to show you guys this real quick, just in case you may not know. You can do this without doing that do not disturb and all that stuff that I've been seeing going around on the internet. Like Apple has literally put the color selection in the lock screen at your disposal. So if we tap this, let's open this up. I'm gonna show you how to create it. I'm gonna do it again. So what you would do is you would go to the very top, scroll over, and there's color. You tap on color, and then you would choose the black color, right? But see, as first it has this gradient. That's not what we want. But if you scroll over down here, you could go to solid. And the solid black color is what you want. You're gonna add your widgets. There you go, bada bing, bada boom. Now I'm still testing this battery-wise, which is why it's on. In my previous videos, I told you guys I turned always on display off, do the battery drain. Now we're gonna test it like this and see if it does better. But nevertheless, before having always on display, what did I do? I tapped my phone, I saw what I needed to see, I turned it back off. And I saved a lot of battery doing it that way. And I eventually went back to that on the 14 Pro Max. There is a difference when it comes to always on versus not. For those people who want to put it bedside and kind of have like this as like your alarm clock or your bedside clock, that's an option. And also I get to see stocks, my AirPods Max battery, and I get to see the weather conditions all at the glance if I were to put this bedside. So the always on display is clutch. It's been fire on Android for all these years, so it's a pleasantry to have. I just didn't like the colorful representation that we were shown in the beginning from Apple, which I personally felt like drained more battery than necessary. Now for the next difference between these two, and it's a quick subject to talk about because it's fairly easy to discern and discuss. The A15 Bionic Apple chip versus the A16 Bionic Apple chip. There's not much difference in the structure of them. Matter of fact, I'll get technical for this just to show you. So when it comes to the A15 Bionic chip, it has a 6-core CPU, 5-core GPU, with 16-core neural engine. Guess what the A16 have? The exact same platform and build. And even when you go year over year on Apple chips, you know, the improvement is always just like minimal, but at best, the reality is these chips are ahead of the competition. So either way you go, you're winning. There's not much of a difference, but there is a difference. There's more performance, newer, later efficiency, and so forth. We'll talk more on that efficiency when we get into battery life, because I got something to say on that topic. You know, the most controversial topic of all, but it's one of the biggest topics when it comes to the Pro Maxes. So hang in for there. But again, chip, performance, either way you go, W. Now, the next real true upgrade and change between these two is the brand new 48 megapixel camera on the 14 Pro Max versus the 13 Pro. The 13 Pro Max has the 12 megapixel we've been, using for a while now, but this new and improved 48 megapixel sensor is in the 14 Pro Max. Let's go outside. Woo! Now it's time for the battle of the Maxes. 13 Pro Max versus 14 Pro Max. iPhone always has a pretty consistent, very well performing camera system on their smartphones. So whether if I'm on the 13 Pro Max versus the 14 Pro Max, I'm not sure if there will be much of a difference when we go inside, especially in the front camera department. But I want you guys to get in the comment section down below and let me know if you see any type of a difference, if there is one. All right, so now we come to the rear facing camera, and this is where things will and should get slightly interesting. Now, the 12 megapixel camera on this iPhone 13 Pro Max has never been a slouch. In my, like year and some change of using this phone, it's always been solid. But when we go to 48 megapixels, which is 4 times, technically, it's pixel binding and whatever, so forth. At the end of the day, we should see a difference. We should see an improvement, but is it enough to warrant you upgrading, or is it enough to even care, or is it enough for many? Now, again, on the upgrade argument and discussion, you guys, it's not year after year. People keep their iPhones for 3, 4, 5, even 6 years. Just keep that in mind. Like, it's not always with Apple thinking about last year's customer. It's more about the long-term customer and the refinements, buffing out certain things. So nevertheless, rear facing cameras. Let's get to the ultra wide. Now we have the ultimate ultra wide, baby. That's that camera that you pull out when you trying to get that vlog or that wide shot. I like the regular camera mostly because when I'm filming, I like to see on the screen what I'm filming. So if I'm filming myself, I'm going to use the front facing. And if I'm filming something, we'll just typically use the wide. I'll switch to the ultra wide when necessary, but I don't always film myself. So we got the 14 Pro Max versus the 13 Pro Max. I don't know if in this department I'm expecting for much or as big of a difference as opposed to like the wide angle camera, but we'll see. Let's check out that 3x zoom. All right, you guys, now we have the 3x zoom. We have one getting my right foot Yeezy slide and the other one getting the left foot. Which one looks better? If there is even a better at this point, because honestly, it's probably identical. So as you saw, I can't tell looking while I'm recording on the displays, and I won't know until I get into editing these, but I just need you guys to comment down below and let me know, is there even a difference between the 13 Pro Max camera and the 14 Pro Max camera, especially when I switch to the 48 megapixel versus the 12 megapixel. You can be heard down in the comment section below. There's another topic of discussion on display that I should have spoke about when I was talking more on the display, but it's the nits of brightness, the max peak nits of brightness, which is 2,000 nits with the 14 Pro Max versus what I believe to be 1,200 nits on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Here's the kicker, you guys. Outside in the sun, the 13 Pro Max actually held its own against the 14 Pro Max. I recorded it on screen. It's hard to tell, but I'll show you that. To my visual eye, they're both are very visible in the sunlight. I can see the edge of visibility on the 14 Pro Max, but on camera, I don't know if you can even tell between the two. And as you saw right there, if you were even able to see, because I know I'm using the camera outside and so forth, even though 2,000 nits is 800 more nits than the 1,200, the 13 Pro Max held its own. But as far as that being like a deciding factor between the two, I don't think so. Now, another difference that is a difference, but it's not a difference that matters, is when you record in cinematic mode, now on the 14 Pro Max, you can do 4K versus the HD cinematic mode on the 13 Pro Max. I haven't never really been the biggest fan of cinematic mode. Maybe I'll go outside and I'll test it right now and see, but it's never been my thing. And neither do I think that it's a deciding factor unless you're just huge into like creating video content, which is smartphone only and exclusively, and that's like a feature that you really wanted. It's not a deciding factor. Okay, next area of differences between these two devices. What does it come down to? Safety features. There's a lot more newer safety features that have been added to the 14 Pro Max that aren't on the 13 Pro, such as this new communication to satellite if in need. If you're somewhere where you can't get a cellular signal, there's an option to be able to communicate via satellite to send out a SOS and, you know, an emergency call for help, which for those people who could possibly be in those situations, and to be honest, we don't even know if we could end up in one of those as an everyday user, because it's quite possible. Now, it's a lower percentage of it happening, but if it were to happen, it would be nice to have those features. Those are just safety features that are cool. It's just the polishing of what was here getting better in the 14 Pro Max, but it's not a deciding factor by far, unless you are one of those adventurous, you know, Apple Watch Ultra-ish type of folks that would benefit from having this 14 Pro Max paired with your Apple Watch Ultra on your adventure, so that way you just have those extra safety features that could come in handy for saving your life. The next topic of conversation between these two is battery life. The most controversial topic to discuss between any two smartphone devices is battery life. Now, I can confidently and wholeheartedly say that the battery life on the iPhone 13 Pro Max was absolutely phenomenal and continues to be. Now, we would love to see that same title and battery experience carry over to the 14 Pro Max, but I must say this, with the added always on display, you're pulling on the battery just a little bit more. With this brand new iOS 16, which has bugs and quirks that haven't been fully, ironed out yet, there's a little bit more of a draw on the battery with the 14 Pro Max. So I noticed that in the beginning when I first got it. Now, granted, this is early iOS 16 and so forth. I was like, wait a minute, this battery didn't feel as luxurious and robust as the 13 Pro Max. This 13 Pro Max, as of right now, is super buffed out and optimized, while this 14 Pro Max is getting a few kinks ironed out right now. But nevertheless, all in all, I can say this, the 14 Pro Max has a great battery life, especially if you turn off always on display. I'm testing, as I said, I'm testing this new black one, so we'll see how this one does for me. And if I notice anything, I'll let you guys know on the 1 month review for the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which is coming soon. Actually, I have a 3-week, I believe, and then the 1 month. But like right now, it's very close. Very ideal between the two as far as battery life goes. I don't think you can lose going either way. I think they both have some of the best, if not arguably the best batteries on today's flagship. All right, now for the most important, the most ideal topic to discuss and the most necessary is user experience. What is your user experience going to be like between these two devices? Which is the exact reason why I decided to use the 14 Pro Max, use it for 3 to 4 weeks before even speaking to this video. Now, let's start here. 13 Pro Max user experience, I loved it. I appreciated it. It was new and refreshing, and it was battery life like no other. This was like a phone that got a lot of Android users, yes, Android users, came over to the Apple ecosystem just for this battery life and to see what the hype was about. The hype is real. There's truth to the hype. And a lot of people who own this phone will swear by it day and night. Now, whether or not the person using this 13 Pro Max should even consider jumping into the 14 Pro Max, I mean, let's be real, you guys. Year-over-year updates or upgrades in today's day and time are, they're just fine-tuning. And going year to year is not the craziest leaps and bounds. It's not going to be the craziest innovations, especially with this glass slab. Now, with the foldables, it's a little bit different, but that's a topic for another day. But there's a lot of people in the iPhone world that keep their smartphones for 4 to 5 to 6 years because they last like that. Everything's controlled, and that's the benefit of that, is you get longevity and functionality over the years. For those people, they might be looking like, hey, I could get one of these on the aftermarket for cheaper than this. So is it worth it? Should I go aftermarket, hop into this 13 Pro Max, which has been goated and raved about, or do I go for the new and latest 14 Pro Max? So before we answer that, let's talk about the 14 Pro Max user experience. We have a new iOS dropping alongside that, the same iOS that can run on the 13 Pro Max, which is running on the 13 Pro Max, but in a different light and different way. You got the always on display. Everyone's always wanted this on an iPhone. It's here, but it's here only in the 14 Pro Max. So if this is something that you can benefit from and that you look forward to, that's a one-up in favor of the 14 Pro Max over the 13 Pro Max. Now, there's also the camera sensors. We have that new and improved 48 megapixel wide main angle camera. You saw the camera test. You can decide for yourself and your personal preference if that's worth it for you as a +1 in favor of the 14 Pro Max versus the 13 Pro Max. It's up to you to decide. Battery life between the two, let's be honest, these are neck and neck. In the beginning, I was like, I don't know if this feels like the 13 Pro Max, you know? But I made a few tweaks, turn off always on display, and I'm able to get that similar feel that I had on the 13 Pro Max. Now I'm gonna go back one step to camera because I didn't really speak to my user experience of camera between these two when I was in my segment of the 13 Pro Max. I love the cameras on the 13 Pro Max, and I've used them countless time over and over in my content to capture B-roll when I didn't have a camera with me or I didn't necessarily want to bring a camera with me. This substituted extremely well, which brings us to the 14 Pro Max, which has this new and improved and better camera sensor within it, and that shall continue to stay true for me. I've used the 14 Pro Max to capture countless footage in my in my marathon of content that you guys see me run on and will continue to do. So I'm going to continue to do that in my user experience from now into the future with the 14 Pro Max, especially considering the fact that the camera sensors have improved. So we round all that up into the collective. What is the conclusion, you guys? These are both going to give you a very, very much of a similar experience. Now, let's be real, you guys. The notch versus the island, that's personal preference. I prefer the dynamic island over the notch as far as my everyday use in display. So that's a +1 for me in favor of the 14 Pro Max over the 13 Pro Max. But CJ, I have a 13 Pro Max. Should I upgrade to the 14 Pro Max? I mean, you gotta want to do that, and you gotta be one of those people who want to upgrade every year to do that. That's kind of where that arena is. It's not like a, hey, yo, 13 Pro Max people, there were so many issues with the 13 Pro Max, you need to get the 14 Pro Max so that all of those issues are solved. That's not the case in point between these two. You're gonna have an ideal iOS 16 experience on either one of these devices. Now, the people who are coming from those older devices, and you may be trying to decide between a possibly cheaper aftermarket 13 Pro Max versus the 14 Pro Max brand new, which might be a little bit more expensive. Now, we all know Apple products hold their resale value extremely well. So although the 13 Pro Max that you might find on the aftermarket, depending on condition, if I were doing that, I have to aim for mint and top notch, you know, the price may not be that far apart. I would say whatever your budget is fitting for, like from a realistic, financially responsible perspective, that's what you go with. If I were coming from an older smartphone, me personally, I would go for like brand new, latest and greatest, so that way I can do another, 5 to 6 years starting from that era and not being like a year off of the, 5 to 6 years by going with the previous. But there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you can do this and be good, and you will feel the upgrade, especially if you're coming from like 5, 6 years back. Yes. Either one of these, you're going to feel the upgrade and you're going to enjoy it. It's about those key features that matter to you most. Boop, 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 boop. Hey, yo, smash the subscribe button. And guess what you got to hit with that? The bell. If you don't hit the bell when you hit subscribe, it's not the same. It's not a real, true subscription because you can miss these brutally honest tech reviews.